Coming up today, despite strong opposition at home and abroad, Japan takes another step closer to a more assertive military role overseas as lawmakers pass a series of controversial security bills. The two Koreas failed to reach a compromise on their protracted dispute over the wages of North Korean workers at their joint industrial park in the north. First, the European Central Bank throws the Greek banking system a lifeline by increasing emergency funding to the banks by €900 million. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome. It's 6 a.m. on Friday, July 17th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome and you're tuned in to our early morning edition of Arirang News. Our top story this morning, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is inching closer to achieving his goal of significantly expanding the role of Japan's military. The country's lower house approved a set of controversial security bills on Thursday despite growing public opposition. Kim Ji-yeon starts us off.
Japan's lower house of parliament has approved new legislation that could allow Japanese troops to fight abroad for the first time since World War II. The package of 11 security bills would enable the Japanese military to aid an ally under attack.
The security situation surrounding Japan is becoming increasingly challenging. With this in mind, it is an absolutely necessary legislation to protect the lives of the Japanese and also to prevent the country from going to war.
The legislation will now be put up for a vote in the upper house, which has 60 days to approve it. If no action is taken, the lower house can push the bills through with another vote to make them into law by September 27th, when the current parliamentary session ends. Supporters of the bill argue a bolder stance is essential to meeting new security challenges, including a rising China. The bill's passage comes amid mass protests in Japan and a dent in Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's approval ratings. Organizers in Japan say an estimated 60,000 protesters rallied against the legislation, fearing the country will be dragged into U.S.-led conflicts around the world. Demonstrators say the revisions could violate Article 9 of the country's pacifist constitution, drafted after Japan's defeat in World War II. The development is of particular concern to Korea and China, who both say Tokyo hasn't shown any genuine remorse for Japan's imperialistic aggressions during wartime. Meanwhile, Abe's disapproval ratings in Japan rose 5 points to 42% in an Asahi Shimbun poll released earlier this week. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
The two Koreas held rare government-level talks aimed at resolving a long-standing wage hike dispute at the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex on Thursday, but the two sides were unable to narrow their differences. Speaking at a news conference following the talks, Lee Sang-min, the South Korean official who headed Seoul's delegation, said the South presented plans designed to normalize operations at the complex while proposing ways to improve working conditions and customs procedures. But he said the North refused to budge on its demand to raise the minimum monthly wage by around 5% to $74 and showed a half-hearted attitude throughout the meeting. The South maintains Pyongyang's unilateral move to raise wages is against a bilateral agreement which stipulates the operation of the complex should be based on settlements made through dialogue. The two sides also failed to set a date for the next meeting. The historic nuclear deal agreed earlier this week between Iran, the US and other major world powers is already having some significant diplomatic ripple effects. But will it positively reshape North Korea's attitude towards denuclearization? For more on the prospects of that happening, Connie Kim reports.
Experts say Iran and North Korea are in different stages of nuclear weapons development. North Korea has carried out 3 nuclear tests and has the ability to produce highly enriched uranium. Iran, on the other hand, possesses low-enriched uranium and is in the early stages of nuclear weapons development.
In a capitalist country like Iran, the economic sanctions on the country may have played a big role in its decision to curb its nuclear weapons program. While in Pyongyang's case, sanctions against the regime have had little effect on its reclusive economic system.
North Korea shows no signs of coming back to the negotiating table after it walked away from the six-party denuclearization talks in 2008. What's even more concerning is that the regime claims it has the capability to miniaturize warheads small enough to load onto ballistic missiles. To bring about progress in the long-stalled multilateral talks, the consensus seems to be that inter-Korean talks are the first step. Experts in Seoul say improvements in inter-Korean ties are critical in laying the groundwork for a breakthrough in North Korea's nuclear weapons program.
Showing flexibility in inter-Korean relations by providing humanitarian aid or starting exchanges between the two countries could open up the doors for talks.
Experts also note, however, the importance of a summit between Seoul and Washington scheduled for later this year. The last time the two leaders met, they say the pressure on Pyongyang to denuclearize increased, which in turn led to a deterioration in relations with the regime. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, North Korea has given its own answer to the likelihood of it giving up its nuclear arms. Pyongyang's state-controlled propaganda website criticized Seoul on Thursday for asking the regime to consider abandoning its nuclear ambitions in light of the Iran agreement. The website said talk about denuclearization was gibberish and blasted the South Korean government for making such remarks. It said North Korea will continue to develop its nuclear program as a means of self-defense against other nuclear powers like the United States. Now, one thing for sure is that with the Iran nuclear deal, if everything goes to plan at least, South Korean companies will be able to resume business activities with the country. For more on the potential impact of the historic agreement on the local economy, Shin Se-min reports.
Korean firms are gearing up to resume their business in the oil-rich country now that the Iran nuclear deal has passed their first hurdle. Data by the Korea International Trade Association shows that trade volume between the two countries peaked in 2011, but fell after stifling economic sanctions were imposed in 2012. The biggest beneficiaries in Korea are expected to be in the shipbuilding, petrochemical, and construction sectors. And Korean builders are hoping to be the biggest winners as Iran was their fourth largest offshore market before the sanctions were set.
With the normalization of the economy there, Korean firms could construct a $43 billion market, thanks to the good reputation they've built.
Auto parts, home appliances, and cosmetics are also promising export items. Korean products took up nearly 70% of the Iranian home appliance market last year, thanks to a lifting of sanctions on some consumer products.
The Iranian government fostered domestic industries like automobiles, which eventually boosted Korean exports of auto parts and steel plates.
Iran, which has the world's fourth largest oil reserves, is expected to gradually ramp up production, pushing down global oil prices and eventually helping shipping companies save on costs. But experts say companies shouldn't get too excited just yet.
Currently, the trade volume between the two is less than 1% of Korea's total trade. So prospective companies should seek to enter industries other Korean firms haven't yet explored.
The government has vowed to support Korean firms by setting up a help center and keeping close tabs on the market as the competition for contracts and lingering economic uncertainties could put local companies at a disadvantage. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, staying with economic news, and the Asian Development Bank has slashed its growth forecast for Korea. According to an ADB report, the Korean economy is expected to grow 3% this year, and that's down from its previous outlook of 3.5%. The bank also revised down its projection for next year to 3.5% as well. The report added that slower than expected growth in China and the US will have a negative impact on Korea, which is a heavily export-driven country. Korea's exports have slumped for 6 straight months through June this year. Eurozone finance ministers have agreed to provide a €7 billion bridging loan to help Greece meet its upcoming debt repayments to the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The European Central Bank also says it will increase emergency support to Greek banks. It plans to send them an extra €900 million in emergency funding. The ECB's decision means Greek banks will likely reopen on Monday for the first time since late June. The latest developments come after Greek Parliament this week approved austerity measures demanded by its international creditors in order to receive a third bailout of some €86 billion. Officials are in the final stages of signing off on that, which is why Greece needs a bridging loan. Brazil is forecast to become the largest beef and poultry exporter in the world over the next 10 years. A report released by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and the OECD shows Brazil is on course to overtake the United States by 2024. The report says Brazil is already the largest supplier of sugar, orange juice and coffee in the world. The report notes that since China is Brazil's largest buyer in terms of food, the Asian country's future economic growth will have a huge impact on how much food Brazil will export abroad. Back here in Korea, and President Park Geunhye met with the ruling Saenuri Party leaders on Thursday, urging lawmakers to join government efforts to revive the economy. Now, the meeting was held in a rather cordial atmosphere, not seen in weeks, really, after the president vetoed disputed revisions to the National Assembly law. Kaesong reports.
Congratulating the ruling Saenuri Party's new floor leadership, President Park Geunhye said her office, the government and the ruling party must unite to tackle a number of reform tasks at hand.
지난번에 공무원 연금도 그런 필요한 교육 과제 중에 하나였지만 그런 과제들 또 노동 교육이라든가 이런 것을 잘 실천을 해서 그 경제를 살리고 더 나아가서 경제 재도약을 이룰 수 있도록 그렇게 이끌어 주시기를 바랍니다.
She also urged the party's new leadership to put the public interest first. While pledging its full support for the president, the party said it would do its best to pass a bill for a supplementary budget through parliament during the current session. The budget aims to help people affected by the MERS outbreak and a recent drought. The ruling party also said it will resume dialogue with the presidential office and the government soon.
We reaffirmed that we can only gain the public's trust when we communicate and unite in moving in the right direction.
The communication channel was severed for several weeks amid controversy over revisions to the National Assembly law that would have given the parliament the power to request changes to ordinances. Concerned about the bill's unconstitutionality, President Park vetoed it, slamming former floor leader Yoo Seung-min for engaging in politics for his own personal interest. Meanwhile, the party asked the president to pardon some of the country's business leaders around the time of Korea's Liberation Day next month. The party cited a need to encourage corporate investment to revitalize the economy. In a display of faith, President Park held a separate one-on-one meeting with party leader Kim Moo-sung. While the presidential office and the ruling party managed to patch things up, a tripartite meeting with the opposition party leader may also resume after the president agreed to consider that prospect. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
The government is working to officially declare an end to the MERS outbreak as early as next month. The head of Korea's Central MERS Task Force, Kwon Dok-chul, says the government is reviewing the details of the announcement. He said Korea will most likely make the declaration on August 2nd, which will be 28 days, or twice the incubation period of the virus after the last infected patient was confirmed. The government's time frame is different to that of the World Health Organization, which recommends the 28-day countdown begins after the last infected patient is fully recovered. Now, taking a brief look at the weather, and due to the indirect effect of the 11th typhoon of the season, Nanka, Korea's eastern regions are receiving rainfall along with some pretty strong gusty winds. Now, coastal areas are also expected to be hit by high winds and waves through Saturday. High wind warnings have already been issued for Korea's port cities and islands. Meanwhile, the typhoon, which is moving northward, has made landfall in southern Japan on late Thursday. Traffic has been disrupted, mostly in western Japan, with some flights and railway services cancelled or suspended. Well, that's all we have for now. Have a wonderful weekend, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. And we do hope to see you at the same time on Monday. Until then, goodbye.